Elizabeth Warren's campaign announced Friday the senator raised nearly $25 million during the third quarter. That haul is near the top of the pack. Warren is shy of beating Senator Bernie Sanders' total by fewer than $1 million. Both those candidates brought in far more than the frontrunner in this race, Joe Biden. The former vice president's campaign announced it raised about $15 million in the last 3 months. For context, we should note these numbers are eclipsed by the other side of the aisle. The Trump campaign and Republican National Committee hauled in a combined $125 million. They report having $156 million in cash on hand. Let's bring in our panel now. With me on set are Leslie Sanchez and Antjuan Seawright. Leslie is a CBS News contributor and Republican strategist. Antjuan is a CBSN political contributor, Democratic strategist, and senior advisor to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Welcome to both of you. Antjuan, I want to start with you. As we mentioned, the two more progressive frontrunners outraised Biden this last quarter quite significantly. Should the Biden campaign be worried about that?
Not so much, because money does not always equal a movement or momentum. Now, I applaud Senator Warren and Senator Sanders for those large fundraising numbers, but when that starts to trickle down to votes, chipping away from Vice President Biden's support, especially when it comes to African-American voters, then I think the Biden camp should be concerned. But as long as the nerve center doesn't have any problems, African-American voters, particularly in South Carolina, to start out, I think he's still okay. And keep in mind that Joe Biden has had to spend his time making his rounds around the country when Warren and Sanders have always been aggressive fundraisers in their roles as U.S. senators. And that's a big difference. Biden has been the vice president. Obviously, there's been a lapse in time. They've consistently raised money online in aggressive ways. And so I think you probably see that being a trickle-down effect.
So speaking of, fundraising translating into votes, interesting because Pete Buttigieg raised, Leslie, about $25 million the previous quarter, not this most recent quarter, but he raised about what Sanders and Warren did this previous quarter. But however, he didn't see that translate into votes. So what is the connection here between the fundraising and the votes? And by the way, this most recent quarter, he saw that haul drop.
I think Antjuan's exactly right. There's not necessarily a connection with money. So the thing you look for is the kind of the low, small donor increasement, because that usually implies engagement. And engagement in early primary states becomes really important. Having the Hollywood effect, having kind of this like wait, and see star power doesn't necessarily mean that tried and true voters who turn out in primaries when it's freezing outside and they have better things to do with their time, they feel that this is the most critical thing. And a lot of times people don't see that until they get to a general election. So those primary voters are really the ones that make a difference, and they are not yet connecting the dots with the mayor.
Right. And now I want to ask about Sanders' health, Antjuan. We know he just recently underwent a heart procedure. What are you hearing from his campaign about how he's doing and when he's going to be back on the trail?
Well, first, let me say my thoughts and prayers are with him, his family,
Absolutely.
and his staff. No matter what differences any of the candidates may have, Democrat, Republican, or even in this contest, no one wants to see anyone experience health challenges. I think that for Bernie Sanders and the staff, what I hear from some of his top lieutenants is that he's easing back into this thing. Obviously, he cannot break the speed limit in terms of doing events and inserting himself back in the process, but I think it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint for him. And I think he probably should just focus on being prepared for the next debate and not overdo it, because those are very serious health matters that he dealt with that I don't think, at least in my lifetime, a presidential candidate has dealt with.
Right. All right. And we certainly wish him a very speedy recovery. Leslie, what did you want to add to that?
No, it's true. And I mean, so in the context of we're all in the horse race and we're all looking, whether you're Republican or Democrat, when you're talking about heart issues or any types of significant health issues like that, and the tremendous amount of pressure and stress that has on the heart, I don't think we can discount that regarding just the stress of the campaign and certainly the ripple effect all the way down. Yeah. That's why I think ensuring if he is going to be the nominee, if he is going to move and ascend to that, then it really is it is a slower pace, because accelerating that, and I've had family heart issues in our family and such, that who who has it, right?
Yeah.
It's really become common day. I don't think anybody is going to have an appetite for a candidate who overly exerts himself, because every family has fundamentally talked about that, and this does come down to a health issue.
Yeah, I think Americans understand that.
To add a little humor to it, Bernie Sanders is very message disciplined. If you saw his first tweet after everything went down, he talked about the need for having Medicare for all. He talked about access and quality of health care that he received, and he says this is why essentially we need Medicare for all. So I commend the senator for being message disciplined.
Yes, and I'm sure his big fundraising haul is cheering him up a little bit. I want to talk about the upcoming debate, because we have 12 candidates on the stage, some who've never been on there before. Tom Steyer, for one. How is that going to change the dynamic, Antjuan?
I don't know how it would change the dynamics per se, but I think the conversation in this debate will obviously become a little deeper and much more wide than previous debates, because now I think people who were not paying attention before because of this blown apart news cycle are starting to insert themselves and pay attention now. So I think the conversation and the content of the debate, obviously how the questions are positioned to ask matters, but also you're starting to see Elizabeth Warren trail Joe Biden a little closer. So look for her to be a little more aggressive, but also look for people to start to take shots at her on her record, because to this point, we still have not seen that. And so I think you should definitely, there's some dynamics we have to look for in this debate, but also look for Joe Biden to stand out more this time around on a bigger stage, but he's still the main nugget on that big stage.
Right. And Leslie, one of the issues that's almost certain to come out is impeachment, right? We're definitely going to be talking about that. How do these candidates differ in their approaches to this issue?
Sure. You have some kind of extreme that have already, been the judge and jury in this case, and they've already made a determination. And for most cases, pretty much everybody on that stage has done that. So the question is the pall of impeachment suppressing the ability to talk about real kind of pocketbook issues that people are paying attention to? How do you juxtapose that next to the fact that we just hit the 50-year low on unemployment, historic lows on that, and then you still kind of have a mixed view of the economy? So if voters are really going to kind of really crystallize what a primary early leader or contender is going to look like, they're going to need to hear more about that and less about their call for impeachment.
I totally agree with my dear friend who's on the other side of me. I think that Democrats have to stay focused. I think Trump is setting the tone for this debate to make it about him, and I think we have to block and tackle in this regard, block out the noise that may come along with Donald Trump and his distraction, but really tackle the issues, as you mentioned, that matter to everyday voters. For voters who are trying to figure out how to feed their families, how to pay for child care, how to deal with skyrocketing prescription drug prices, they really don't care so much about the discussions we're having in the bubble by impeachment. So I think we have to be able to do both. Hold the president accountable like the Congress is starting to do or has made their attempts to do, but also focus on the issues. And I think how we deal with that will determine the success.
And that's an intensity issue, right? Is it a voter who's intensifying? Are you going to do your job, hold him accountable, get this impeachment done? These are voters that fundamentally don't want him to be the president. That's why they're engaged in this process. But is that going to be enough? It's enough for the fervor, for the fever pitch, but is it enough for once you transition? Okay, then what do you have? Is it an empty suit or pantsuit? Whatever that may be, what does that situation look like?
My aunt said this to me yesterday. She said, does the next president have the ability to control what the Congress will do? And I said, absolutely not. And my aunt is not in the bubble. She doesn't read Twitter. She doesn't know about Facebook and all the things that but that's why there's a disconnect sometimes in the conversation. So we have to make it plain and simple. No matter who the nominee will be, they do not control the impeachment conversation. So what they can control, I think they have to focus on that and let the Congress do its job.
Now, beyond our candidates, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee held a call last week to tell caucus members, lawmakers home on recess, how to talk about all of this, the impeachment inquiry. You were a senior advisor for the DCCC. You are still. How would you advise lawmakers to talk to their constituents about this?
Listen more than you talk, and then talk about the work that Democrats have done and explain to them that we have a sworn duty, obligation to provide checks and balances to the executive branch and oversight. And when people start to go down the road of saying, you all are doing impeachment, you have to put a full stop there and remind them an impeachment inquiry is different than impeachment, and Congress is doing their job of providing oversight and asking the right questions and gathering information. I think that has to be the message. They have to stay focused, but also remind people that when this conversation started, the American people had one view. Now, if you look at even the squiggly group called independents, they're more in favor of an impeachment inquiry. That's why you see so many frontline Democrats saying, you know what, we need to do our job of gathering information.
Now, I want to end the way we often do this week with who had a good week and who had a bad week. Leslie, let's start with you.
Who had a good week? I would say Elizabeth Warren had a good week, not only because she continues to be tried and true. She has a consistent performance. She's raised incredible numbers in terms of fundraising prowess. And just by virtue of not being Biden and not being Sanders this week, it kind of everything froze in Washington, both with the scandal issues that Biden's dealing with and certainly the health issues. And it kind of freezes everything in place. And when it does that, it allows her to ascend and to keep ascending. She doesn't have any of that other kind of issue she has to deal with. I think that's extremely positive.
And who had a bad week?
On a bad week, I would continue to say Adam Schiff. He's the head of the House impeachment inquiry, the investigation on the Intelligence Committee. And it was, the Washington Post did a very kind of stark, clear piece that he did have, his team and committee did have contact with the whistleblower prior to the whistleblower launching the complaint, which taints the whole conversation, looks extremely political. So and he already had, you could kind of judge and jury again on that as well. So on an issue as serious as impeachment, it still looks like partisan politics. And for that reason, if he was trying to advance that, it went nowhere.
All right, Antjuan, your turn. Who had the good week and who had the bad week?
Nancy Pelosi definitely had a great week. She has demonstrated why she is a force to reckon with in Washington. We went from people having unfavorable opinions, particularly independent and swing voters, to now she's consolidated where Democrats, independent thinkers, and even some moderate Republicans in some of the polls floating around said they are in favor of an impeachment inquiry. I think how she has laid this thing out and how she has made the case to the American people in a very methodical way just demonstrates her ability to lead on issues that may not start out a certain way but end up a certain way. I think the president and some officials around him had a very bad week. No good, terrible, very bad week. When you look at him admitting on camera that he asked foreign leaders to dig up dirt on political opponents. When you look at the Ukraine liaison, I'll call him, who testified to members of Congress and displayed the text messages. When you look at Rudy Giuliani, his personal attorney, continuing to embarrass himself. And you look at the Secretary of State, and some of the mishandles they've had as relates to all of this, I think that demonstrates that, one, they're not ready for the big leagues, but two, that this thing is not as clear-cut, they're so clear as they want to make it out to be.
All right. Great talking to you both. Antjuan and Leslie, always so much fun. Thank you for being with us.